Welcome to r/RedditRevenge. This is a story of someone getting back at someone with revenge after being wronged. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story. I parked a broken car badly. Neighbor called police. For 6 months I made it difficult for him to park and made him stare at my beret. The second story. Jerk and son went bankrupt. Came to ask for help from Jerry, whom they humiliated and mocked him. The third story. Lazy employees did not want to do their job, so they got a lot of empty boxes. On to the first story. The Rover of Revenge. So this happened a few years ago, but I'm still very proud of it. For years I had the god-awful Rover 220D. Look it up. It's a bloody awful car. Eventually my wife and I had enough money to buy another, but as this was a very busy period, and I knew I would only get about 200 pounds for the Rover, so it sat on the drive for about 5 weeks. When the busy period was over, I put an ad in the local paper, pre-Gumtree days for it, and later that week I got a young lad asking to look at it with a view to buy it. This was on a Friday night and I was busy but agreed okay. So I went out to the car and tried to start it. No dice. F. Phoned the lad and told him to call me in the morning. Our driveway was fairly steep, so I thought about rolling it down and bump starting it as it crossed the road in front of the house. Tried that but it didn't start, and because for a small car it was very heavy, and the power steering didn't work until you started the car, I could barely move it. So it was stuck halfway across the road. Now my street was a fairly long cul-de-sac, so there was not much traffic. I get the help of some teenage lads down the street and pushed it onto the opposing pavement, sidewalk. It was maybe 50% on and 50% off, and that meant that you could just about squeeze between the car and the wall of the opposite house. As I mentioned, I was busy, so I thought I would leave it there. I'm breaking no laws after all. And in 8 years I had never seen a policeman come down this street. As I said, I was busy, so I left it there and shot off in the new car for about 30 to 40 minutes. When I returned and parked, I noticed something on the windshield. It was a police notice saying I was obstructing the highway, and as the tax had run out it was illegally parked, and I had 24 hours to move it or it would be towed. I rang the police and explained the situation, but they couldn't be less helpful. Just then the teenagers walked up to me and explained that the neighbor 3 doors up on this side of the road had come out as soon as I left, made a call, then a few minutes later a police car had stopped at his house. He had a conversation with the copper, who had then left a note on my car. B? Now this neighbor, let's call him C Bollocks, was well known in the street for having a face like a slapped A, and a missus who was possibly more miserable than him. I had never spoken to this guy in 8 years, except to wave enthusiastically as him, and give him a cheery hello whenever I saw him about once every 3 months, just by way of sarcasm. He had never responded well. Full of pee and vinegar, I stormed up to his house, noticing my missus watching the scene unfold from our front window. I knocked on the door, he answered, denied all knowledge, so I left. I stormed into my house, explained the situation to my good lady wife, and she said that he had definitely done it, as he gave a wide smirk as I turned and walked away. Time for ProRevenge. Now, I consider myself to be relatively clever, but I've got a dark streak, so I spoke to the neighbor with a flat drive opposite, and he agreed I could store the car there for a day or two. A day or two to stew. What could I do? What could I do? 2 days later, I walked into the post office and bought car tax for the Rover for 6 months, 80 pounds. Then when I knew him and his missus were at work, we pushed the car onto the road and up to the very edge of his driveway, so the corner of my car was to the millimeter, in line with the entrance to his drive, meaning he could no longer just swing in, but would have to do a 3-point turn in the narrow street. But I actually wasn't blocking his drive. And there, I simply left it. It took 2 days for the police to arrive at my door. They said they had a complaint. Oh yes, says I. I go out with them and confirm that the car is legally parked, taxed, and not breaking any laws. Satisfied, they leave. Next day, there's a knock at the door. It's C Bollocks. Move your car. Oh, good morning. How are you? Move your effing car. It's blocking my drive. No, I don't think it is. And neither did the officer. I don't give an F. Move it. Well, I'm sorry, but I can't. It won't start, which is why I parked it on the pavement the other day. But it's taxed? Well, I couldn't move it, and I couldn't leave on neighbor's opposite drive, so you left me no choice but to tax it. Well, when are you gonna move it? When it's fixed? When's that? Dunno, bit skin at the moment. Need to get some money together to do that, and the money I had put aside I had to use to tax it. What? Yes, bit of a quandary, isn't it? Without another word, he stormed off. I decided to give it a week to move to phase 2. Under the cover of darkness, I took the photograph my wife had taken of my bared A one sunny day that I had blown up to A3 size on the work printer, on photo paper no less, and stuck it inside the passenger window, which meant every single time he looked out of his front window, there was my beret staring back at him. The following day, the police were back. I had to remove the picture. They had a complaint. I asked if it was from C. Bollocks. They couldn't say. So the policeman and I went and stared at the picture of my beret. I asked what was wrong. He said it was obscene. I agreed. So I opened the car, took a small round luminous yellow sticker I had placed on the seat earlier, as I had an idea this would happen. I gently placed the sticker over the worst part of the picture, leaving the rest just as visible. I asked if this was better. The policeman agreed it was no longer obscene, but still asked if I could remove it. I stated I really couldn't, and the policeman left after thinking about it for a minute. I left that car there unmoving for 6 months. After 3 months, he slashed the tires. I said nothing. I did get one further visit from the police, asking to move the car, as C. Bollocks had been calling the station. A lot, but I stood firm. Then at approximately 1:30 p.m. on the final tax day, I could see C. Bollocks twitching his curtains, hand on his phone ready to pounce. But my 4 friends and I were ready. We left the house, swapped all 4 wheels, from the scrapyard 40 pounds including bald tires, in pit stop time, swapped the battery, which had been diagnosed as the issue one day a month earlier when he was at work, and at 11:55 I started the car and waited, staring intently at his stupid fat face as he watched. At 11:59 I reversed it down the road and parked it back on my drive. 2 days later I sold it. Total cost of revenge 120 pounds. Anger of wife at revenge plot, high. Satisfaction of seeing his fat face knowing he spent 6 months looking at my A and having to 3-point turn just to park on his drive, priceless. The second story is Revenge of the Construction Workers. I'm a teacher, and when I was younger, I would take summer jobs to supplement my income. One summer, I worked for a bricklayer named Jerry and heard an amazing story. I worked for Jerry in the mid-90s, so the story either happened in the early 90s or in the 80s. Here goes. The setting for the story was a community of small rural towns, which had only one brick contractor. Jerry began his career as a bricklayer working for this contractor, a real jerk. Jerk and Jerk's son, adult working the business with his father, would harass, belittle, and humiliate all their employees on a regular basis. No work was ever good enough, and employees were told they weren't worth what they were paid. Not only did Jerk mistreat his employees, but he was equally rude to other subcontractors, and to the general contractors who hired him. Since he was the only bricklayer in the community, there was nothing anyone could do about it. Needless to say, the turnover rate for the brick business was very high. The only person that stuck with Jerk and company was Jerry. Jerry told me that his father had instilled a self-confidence in him that Jerry could do anything he set his mind to do, and that he should not evaluate himself according to what others said, but rather by the facts. Although Jerry was belittled by Jerk and Son, as were all other employees, Jerry was becoming a very good bricklayer. Jerry knew he was good. Jerk knew Jerry was good, but Jerk didn't know that Jerry knew he was good. Not only was Jerry a good bricklayer, he was very respectful to the boss who disrespected him. Jerk thought that Jerry was a naive pushover who was buying his head games. That would prove to be a huge mistake on his part. One day, Jerry was doing an exceptionally good job of laying brick. Not only was his craftsmanship amazing, he was laying brick at a high rate of speed, so that he was making his boss lots of money. Of course, Jerk and Son were belittling his work as though he was doing the very opposite. This scenario was being observed by the general contractor of the project. After work that day, the general contractor asked Jerry to stay behind so he could talk to him. As did every other construction worker in the community, general contractor hated working with Jerry. General contractor told Jerry that he had heard Jerk and Son belittling him, and told him that he disagreed with everything Jerk was saying. He asked Jerry if he had ever considered going into business for himself. Jerry said that he would like to do that someday. General contractor then said that he would loan Jerry the money to buy a mixer, the most expensive piece of equipment needed to start a brick business, if Jerry would indeed start said business. The only hitch was that Jerry would need to pay for the mixer whenever he could, and that he would subcontract under general contractor. Jerry agreed to those terms and prepared to begin his new venture. Jerry respectfully told Jerk and Son his plans and gave his notice. The two mocked Jerry ruthlessly and laughed him to scorn. Jerk told Jerry, "You'll be back in 2 months begging to return your job. You'll never make it as a subcontractor." 2 months later, rather than collapsing as Jerk predicted, Jerry was still in business and going strong. 1 year later, Jerry's business was booming, and a drunk Jerk showed up at Jerry's house and begged him to come back to work with Jerk and Son. "Jerry, you're the best employee I ever had." Jerry replied, "Why didn't you ever tell me that when I was working for you?" Jerk couldn't answer the question. Jerry obviously didn't accept the offer for employment. 2 years after beginning his entrepreneurial adventure, Jerry heard that Jerk and Son went out of business. Jerry said that he never intended to harm Jerkin's son when he accepted general contractor's offer. He said that looking back on things, he realized that he had become Jerk's greatest nightmare. I can't say that general contractor intended no harm. I thought the most amazing thing about the story was how that Jerry maintained his self-esteem in spite of all that ridicule. I also gained a respect for Jerry's father, who instilled an unshakable self-confidence in Jerry. The last story is, too lazy to do your jobs? Well then, take care of the boxes. A bit of backstory. This was during my time I was working in retail every day. My department would get pallets of merchandise that needed to be stocked, usually after my coworkers and I would leave for the day, just before closing. I would work closing 1 week, opening shift the following week, weekends off. During that time, we would have several groups of overnight coworkers, assigned to different departments to stock merchandise brought in on the delivery trucks, and then put any overstock in the back, clean up the cardboard boxes. The opening shift would take care of any overstock pallets the overnights didn't have time to get to. Every week, each group of overnight employees would be rotated to different departments. Unfortunately, there was one group of overnight employees that had a bit of a reputation for being lazy, and those guys were assigned to my department for the week. At the time when this happened, I was working my opening shift, years before COVID. The wrongs being done during this week wasn't so much being done to just me, it was being done to my other coworkers in my entire department, so this was pretty much a group effort. On with the story. My coworkers and I get to our department to find 4 pallets of merchandise, saran wrapped, labeled as overstock. We double-check the pallets and the shelves and find out that it needed to be worked. We were peeved. By that time, the department manager and supervisor found out, and they were absolutely livid. So we ended up working the merchandise, putting them on the shelves. I was getting ready to start breaking down the boxes when I got this wicked idea. My idea was to stack all the empty boxes like they were full, wrap them up, and label them as overstock. But I wanted to get the approval from my supervisor first. When I talked to my supervisor, I mentioned what I wanted to do. My supervisor chuckled at the idea, approved it, and explained what had happened to him last year. Apparently, a year before, the overnight employees played a prank on him on April 1st. They had left 2 pallets of merchandise wrapped up and labeled as overstock. He said he double-checked, only to find out that all the boxes on the pallets were empty. He gathered all of us in the department, explained what we were doing, and we got to work. The supervisor explained that if it should happen again, we should inform him, work the merchandise, restock the empty boxes if they're full, wrap them, label them as overstock, and leave the pallets for the overnighters. Unfortunately, my opening coworkers and I were done for the day. We were at 2 pallets. Fortunately, our closing coworkers were there when the supervisor explained what he wanted done. The next day, we walk in. More pallets of overstock merchandise. Supervisor was informed basically, rinse and repeat for the rest of the week. The last day of the week, however, we walk in. To our surprise, there was only 1 pallet. It had 7 pallets stacked on top of it, with a handwritten "Go F Yourselves" label on it. We informed the supervisor. He informed us that the overnight group assigned to our department were terminated by the store manager. I hope you guys love these stories. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to know when the new video comes out.